You guys can actually take these off when you're done role playing. We'll have this up on the screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's run through these up on the screen here one more time. So we have all our same objects. We've added one more object down here called the GUID table. You can see here we're talking about, and this will make more sense when I run through the arrows, but it's going to enter in the username, create a randomly generated key, and put a timestamp in there. That's what we're actually entering into the table now. Obviously, you can add more columns to this table to do other things. You know, when we talked about the failed attempts and things like that, you know, you can expand upon this from a functionality standpoint. At a basic level, this is what it's doing. So we start off with the end user logging into the portal just like we had before. Authenticate against the LDAP server. LDAP server said this user is good to go. The portal does two things at once. It does a handshake with the presentation server via the header, the cookie, or the server variable that Mike talked about. And it writes a record into the database saying, here's a user I got at this point in time, and I generated this GUID. This GUID is passed in this handshake as well. So the presentation server not only knows who the user is, but it says, or it also contains what the GUID was for that particular user. So at this point in time, it passes that information to the BI server. The BI server does a check against this table. Does the GUID and the user that I received match the user and GUID in here? And was it done within, am I checking within the appropriate period of time? Was there only 10 seconds or 15 seconds between when I was given this information when it was written in the table? And we're going to pretend in this scenario that it was valid, everything's good to go, so the BI server has done that double check. We can now proceed with the rest of the process, getting the authorization information. Groups will pass back to the BI server, which passes it to the presentation server, which shows them the valid dashboards that they're allowed to see.
So this GUID table, is it a user-defined or is it one which is available?
No, generally speaking, you don't want it to be available. In fact, in the last customer that I did this, and they were ultra concerned about security, so they actually didn't even allow the BI server and the portal to directly write into this table. Both had to call a database function that actually did the writing into the table, so that even the portal and the BI server didn't really know where the table was or what the table was called. It had to call a database function that did all the work.
But is that a user-defined or does that table come as part of your
No, you can build this table. Yeah, it does not come with OBIEE. In fact, what we're describing right here, you won't see in the documentation in OBIEE. This is something that we sort of came up with, that we've used at multiple customers that we feel works best. You know, as customers have come to us and said, you know, okay, you've just explained SSO and OBIEE to us, but we don't feel this is secure enough. You know, we feel that there's potential for the system to be compromised because it's easy to spoof a header, it's easy to spoof a cookie. So we came up with this approach, and we've reused this at multiple customers to, you know, put in something that we feel is a bit more bulletproof, or you know, whatever fancy term we want to come up with. And we're just kind of, you know, sharing with you now as a way to share information.
Has there been any concern over performance in terms of, because the table is getting written to constantly as well as read?
Not that has been expressed to me yet, and in environments where this has been implemented, I mean, these are pretty, lots of users, lots of activity, so I haven't heard any concerns with it. Takes a long time to get into the system or anything like that. You know, honestly, I don't think it's that much different than, you know, transaction systems that are having to, you know, constantly write and update records in a table on a regular basis. This is just a single table, so it should perform pretty well.
Since this is just random generated IDs that are only good for 10, 15 seconds, you could in theory just purge the database table.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could. Yeah. In fact, every customer that I'm aware of, and I don't know, you can tell me yours, they actually purge this table at least daily, if not more than that.
Yeah, some of them have a sweeper process that runs every 30 seconds to say, all right, what are the timestamps on all of the records in the table and ones that would be, say, outside that 10, 15-second window that you have for a valid timestamp, would go ahead and sweep out all of those records. So you have minimal records in that table at any given point in time. And really the very simple SQL that gets either sent to the database to query or to write to the table, and then this only happens when you first log in.
But even if you're talking, even if you only clean it up daily, even if you're talking to thousands of users on your system, the average person is going to go in a couple times a day. You're probably, even with thousands of users, still only going to have 5, 10, 15,000 records in there. That's not that big of a table to scan through.